Welcome to Team 2, Adventures in Essentialism and Analysis of Sex, Gender, and Sexuality. In the following, we will show how the essentialism viewpoint has been used and challenged with feminist film theory and other academic discourse. The focus in our presentation will be on sex, gender, and sexuality. What is essentialism? Essentialism refers to the use of biological, physiological, and increasingly genetic causes as explanations for human social behavior. In this case, little, if any, weight is given to psychological, sociological, or cultural explanations. An example of an essentialist viewpoint would be to argue that men are more aggressive than women, and that it is inevitable due to hormonal differences. The intention here is to use biology as the only explanation for any particular social difference and/or behavior. Because of this, these traits are viewed as unchangeable. In order to understand essentialism, it is important to first understand the differences between sex, gender, and biological gender. Society tends to fuse these terms together, subsequently understanding them as the same thing. However, sex refers to one's anatomy. Gender is expressed through one's presentation of masculine or feminine characteristics, and biological gender refers to the anatomy one was born with and the gender that is attached to it culturally. As we break down the concept of essentialism, we ask, what is the essence of femininity and masculinity? For example, from a constructive viewpoint, we believe that anyone who is a woman who acts passively or with vulnerability could be considered feminine, whereas being powerful, strong, or heroic could be considered masculine. We often see these characteristics in advertising and other forms of entertainment media.
The body language of girls is usually passive, vulnerable, and very different from the body language of boys and men. Women are often shown in very silly poses, whereas men are generally afforded dignity and strength, even as children.
Essentialism is reflected in entertainment, media, cinema, and academic discourse. It naturalizes society into thinking that what we see is normal and defines femininity and masculinity to the extent that what we see, for example, as femininity, we believe to be unquestionably true. Even medical literature is gendered. In Martin's article, The Egg and the Sperm, he discusses reproductive discourse as the interrelation of capitalism and patriarchy. The egg is defined as large and passive, and therefore dependent on sperm for rescue, and the sperm as powerful and heroic, as it is able to penetrate the egg. Society classifies man and women into two different categories. We as a society reinforce that there is property or properties definitive of membership. This is demonstrated in the international sign for men and women's public washrooms. There is no perceived flexibility for others. We use the essentialist viewpoint in order to show how sex, sexuality, and gender is represented and misrepresented in the patriarchal system of our world, while examining aspects of feminist film theory and other cultural media. Through a detailed analysis of academic texts and media sources, we hope to inform our peers on the different approaches feminists have taken to confront patriarchy and challenge the status quo. Feminism as a social movement and an emerging ideology has had an incredible impact on the theory of film. Central to the feminist film theory are issues of representation and spectatorship in the cultural practice of cinema. Feminist film theory is used to understand the critique existing patriarchal ideologies and myths about women and femininity. Feminist film theory, also known as FFT, began in the early 1970s, having been a product of second-wave feminism. Initially, its focus was on the use of stereotypes in film and the representation of women in film. However, in the last 40 years, this theory has evolved. With influences from Marxist ideologies and critical theory, FFT has gone beyond the exploration and analysis of film to the critical examination of film. Even further, with an emphasis on semiotics, FFT now looks at advertising as a medium for essentialism. This theory continues to evolve as attitudes towards gender and sexuality progress. Laura Mulvey, a feminist film theorist, uses psychoanalysis as a political tool to analyze how film has been structured by a patriarchal society in her scholarly essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Using psychoanalysis in her work, Mulvey sought to reveal how women in film are sexually objectified as they are put on display for visual pleasure and for visual pleasure only.
Do you come with a car?
Oh, you.
Do you come with the car?
Oh, you.
Psychoanalytic theory states that we act according to our unconscious and irrational desires. It has a heavy reliance on sexual drives as determinants of behavior, like the drive of scopophilia, the act of watching others and receiving pleasure from this objectification. Movie theaters satisfy this voyeuristic desire by placing the audience in the spectator's position and by illuminating only the screen. These effects create the sense of a sealed-off world in which an audience can subject the characters to their curious gazes. According to Mulvey, films reflect how the unconscious mind forms the way in which we look at objects and receive pleasure in doing so. The fixations in films reflect the psychical obsessions of the society which produced it. We see ourselves in the films we watch, but we see the characters as superior and ideal. So while films act to distract us from our daily lives, they also reinforce the ego as we recognize ourselves in the actors. Mulvey argues that mainstream films mostly satisfy male egos by visually arousing erotic pleasure via women. Women in film signify male desires. They are put on display and have a to be looked atness. The female character is only important in what she represents, like the love she inspires in the hero, and not for her character itself. In Mulvey's view, men are unable to be sexually objectified, so they drive the narratives and represent power, while women are passive players in stories. When an audience member identifies with an active male, this carries the protagonist's power onto the male spectator, and the women, the erotic object, becomes the object of both the characters in the story and in the audience. Like in the movies Only Angels Have Wings, the audience members can indirectly possess the female characters through her possession on screen.